Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather forecast brought to you by Ag South Farm Credit and Ag Carolina Farm Credit. Last night we saw some pretty nasty storms that rolled through parts of the south. They hit Texas pretty hard, especially into Houston, where we saw wind speeds that possibly were well over 100 miles an hour. This morning we still have 800,000 people without power in Texas and Louisiana, 160 in Mississippi. We've got 10,000. And I point this out because the same kind of setup that delivered this severe weather is trying to move its way over into parts of the southeast as we work our way toward this weekend. Now, broader picture around all of this is that this particular spring, especially the last about 30 days, has been critical for severe weather. We've had our fair share in the Carolinas and down into Georgia, and it's going to be just a discussion as to what this pattern is going to do and is it going to continue to give us this same kind of look. So let's get into that discussion. I just want to show you some satellite data, though, from yesterday. Now, we had, broadly speaking, some northwest winds, north-northwest winds. And so, from the Carolinas down to Georgia, we weren't looking at a whole lot going on yesterday as the sun was setting. But can you see the haze? That is wildfire smoke that started off the week way up in Alberta. The haze that you have down here in the Gulf, though, this is wildfire smoke from Mexico. And the storms that went ripping through parts of Texas, well, you can see the size of them here late last night or yesterday afternoon, really, before the sun set. And then on the backside, the dust that was blowing in parts of western Texas right there. Now, just thinking about all of it this past 72 hours, so the last 3 days, looking at total accumulated precipitation, we had several chances to get rain in parts of the Carolinas, including some big storms that have rolled through this area. But the wettest conditions over the last week have been largely confined to the Gulf Coast, down here from eastern Texas all the way over to the Florida Panhandle, where we've seen at times incredibly wet weather. What's been important about this is that the storms that have been able to get through this section of the country have helped deliver much needed moisture to beat back that risk of drought we saw at the end of March and through much of April. And even at the beginning of May, we saw it in this area as well. But at the same time as we discuss getting rid of drought, there are places in the country, specifically the Midwest, where we do grow a lot of competing crops, that the wetter conditions have really slowed down the planting of some big crops like corn and soybeans. We've also seen, because of the very wet conditions down here across the south, a changeover from certain crops like cotton maybe to peanuts. We've also seen a shift in acreage due to corn and soybeans and other things as well because of how wet things have been as of late. And if you want to see the ranks, this is just the front half of May. But now we've seen parts of the Carolinas here having the wettest. I mean, this part of South Carolina, these two climate reporting districts, the wettest start to any May on record. Come up North Carolina into Virginia. That drought risk I've been talking about is gone. And if you come even farther to the south, right here in these southern climate reporting districts in Georgia, they are having a top 10, if not a top 5, top 3 wettest start to any May on record. So we've kind of looked at the last 3 days. We looked at the last 7. Now we've looked at the last 16. Let's go back and look a little farther. And let's go back to the last 30 days. Just a different view, but it's showing you the percent of normal precipitation of the last 30 days. And I can't really find large areas that are somewhere less than 90 to 100%. There's a couple of just small pockets you can see right in through here where it's not been quite as wet, and also in through here. But lately, we've brought rain into those areas. So this just continues that narrative that drought seems to not be able to get a foothold in the southeast. And that's critical. Because if that narrative remains true for the next several months, that is going to change where I think the pattern is going to set up for this summer. So before we get there, let's add another dimension to this, soil moisture. Right now, down to 100 centimeters or 40 inches, most of Ag South and Ag Carolina area here is looking at saturated soils. And where we were back at the beginning of the year, well, we were okay. The drought was in the Mississippi Basin and its surrounding tributaries. But what a remarkable difference we've had in these first 5.5 months of this year in terms of the drought that had been persisting for the last couple of years in big sections of the country, primarily to the west. All right, our new drought monitor came out. And even though it still shows a couple of pockets of abnormally dry over in parts of North Carolina, overall the recent rains have gone through and wiped this out. We are now down to the lower 48, having about 13% of its land area in D1 to D4 drought, which is a very, very small amount, some of the lowest we've seen in a while. But I want to be able to show you another aspect to this drought monitor because we also had released in the middle of this month the new North American drought monitor. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because while there's been drought relief here, even some in the hard urban or wheat belt there's been drought relief in the Mid-South, and this area has begun to shrink. Take a look at Mexico getting into the southwest. Take a look at Western Canada getting into northern Montana. There's better rains coming across Canadian prairie. But these areas continue to show up dry, and that's where we saw those wildfires that gave us that smoke. Now, I stress this because as we work our way toward this upcoming summer, I have a big question as to whether or not we bridge the gap in this area, creating large western U.S. ridging. And later on in this forecast video, when I get to the 5-model long-range forecast, I want you to see the possibility of something like that occurring. Because if we build large ridges into the west, that means there are not large ridges over the southeast. It's too close. And as a result, we tend to not have major summer drought episodes. I'm talking the big ones developing over the southeast. If it's all in the west, it's typically not here. So I'll continue to look at that, but I want you to see my line of thought right now. So let's go back and look at one more way at how much drought has changed. This was the latest drought monitor. This is what it looked like last fall. So at the end of November to now, that's how much our drought has changed across the country. Now, I have got a lot of people asking me about 2 very, very wet years in recent memory, and they're critical for actually the southeast. One of the years I'm getting asked a lot about is 2019. Now, in 2019, that was a dry spring for us because we had a large ridge of high pressure that sat right here. And the flow came around and just raced from California to Maine at speeds between 200 and 220 miles an hour, just absolutely screaming, opening up the Gulf and making this whole area wet and extremely delayed in delayed in planting due to precipitation. But that was all based on big areas of high pressure over the southeast sending us into drought. So are we seeing that this year? No, we're not, because we're wet down here too. It's not that to say it's not wet in the Midwest, because I just showed you. I mean, look at the beginning of May. It's wet in big sections of the Midwest. But we're wet here too, and that's a different look. That means the southeastern ridge has not been this kind of just wall blocking everything. It's broken down at times. Another year I've been getting asked a lot about is 1993. Now, I do not see 1993 as an analog. I don't. But just because I'm getting asked about it, that was a year where we saw in May large East Coast ridging already setting up in the month of May. We were getting hot and we were getting dry throughout Ag South and Ag Carolina territory. And then by the time we got into June, that's when we were scorched, incredibly hot, incredibly dry. Big area of high pressure sat right there with another one way up here in Canada that looked like this. And in the middle, there was a frontal boundary stuck there, and that's where all the severe weather was. That's where all the wet weather was. This is what basically turned Iowa into a lake that particular year, and the Mississippi River flooded because of it. Now, I keep talking about these southeast ridges that are not present. They're not there this year, and that's why I'm looking at these analog years. Well, not analog years, these historic years to make a case. They're actually anti-logs in some cases. Without having that southeast ridge, we can't get this. So where are we? Well, this is the European Artificial Intelligence Forecast System, looking at the trough ridge pattern. And just watch. Through Friday into Saturday and Sunday, there's a weak trough sneaking across. This is what's going to increase our strong to severe storm threat throughout the early part of the weekend. It's also going to keep things cooler. Into next week, okay, see the ridge coming in? But it just doesn't last. This deeper trough that's in the Midwest, which is going to kick off severe weather early next week in the central United States, just plows through it. See, and it's gone. What's really going on is the ridging is here, and that's what's sending all of these storm systems around the periphery of the ridge like this. And what we have is by next Friday, getting into the following weekend, this would be the 27th, 28th, and 29th, you don't see large ridges of high pressure living in the southeast. So the pattern is active, but it's not overly amplified with a big ridge over the southeast. I need you to hear me say that on repeat because I want to know when and if that southeast ridge comes back. Because the moment it does, these videos turn from a discussion about rain after rain after rain to then getting into the discussion of no rain for extended time periods as the atmosphere gets blocked up. So that's why we're talking about this. Now, this morning, we have flood watches out for parts of Virginia. The other region is down here coming out of eastern Texas where those severe storms were last night over into parts of the Panhandle and southern sections of Alabama. If we take a look at what our rivers are doing right now, you can see there are several rivers in Virginia, North and South Carolina, down to Georgia, and then, of course, back into this part of Texas, that are neither action or minor, moderate, or major flood stage. So this is a situation of too much water. And just to kind of keep you up to date on the Mississippi River, after spending months at historic low levels, just a long time there, the river this morning's at nearly 27 feet above low stage, and it's going to start to work its way up here into where we get into some action stage with that river. So just want to keep you posted on something going on in the center part of the country. So today's severe weather risk is primarily going to be confined to Louisiana over into southern Georgia and also here in the northern plains. Tomorrow, it's going to be over us in the southeast. Most of Ag South and Ag Carolina territory has the risk of some stronger storms coming up. And then we go into a bit of a reset, but we have more coming our way because if you look out there, day 4, which would be Monday, the pattern's resetting here in the Midwest. Day 5, it slides over to the Mississippi Valley, and those systems continue to press east, giving us chances for getting storms in our area. If you're curious, this is what the preliminary reports look like for severe storms across the United States. And you can see the cluster of these reports happening really right here on the border between North and South Carolina, where lately we've seen some big storms. We've had over 800 tornadoes reported, over 3,800 reports of severe wind damage, and over 2,300 reports in hail. And if you're curious how that stands compared to history, well, wind reports about 1,000 more than normal. Hail reports right on average. Tornado reports way above average by about 170. Very active spring, and I don't see the end of May changing much about this. So we need to see what the models are going to suggest here. Now, as we play this forward in the NAM, this is this morning playing through mid-afternoon and evening. A lot of isolated but possibly stronger storms moving through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. It'll be late tonight into the overnight hours that I'm going to be watching this, as heavier rain could be exiting early tomorrow morning across the eastern half of North Carolina. Now into Saturday afternoon and evening, we're going to watch for the chance for more of these storms to pop. So I know you're not seeing much on the animation here, but we have to understand that the model's not going to be perfect in picking up on it. It's just giving us the ideas. We need to understand the risk of some stronger storms. As we play into Saturday night and into early Sunday morning, again, stronger storms could exist, but this first system we're going to talk about is finally out by that point. So what follows it? Well, let me get you an update here. We should have the new run, and nope, still the old one. This is the 0Z run from the European Artificial Intelligence. Take a look at these precipitation totals it has for us over the next week. We're pushing in here between 3/4 of an inch and 1.25 inches, some places being even much wetter down here in parts of Georgia. If we zoom in, might as well do that. We have the ability to do this. I'm working on a whole new suite of maps for you here. This is what the artificial intelligence forecasting system is looking at in terms of precip totals for our neck of the woods. If we go from there to the WPC, again, look at the streakiness of the storms coming through with the potential for putting down 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches of total precip. That's also echoed in the national blend of models. See that we got wetter conditions coming into our area. The European model, same scenario. And also the GFS, bringing in better chances of storms, although the GFS is the driest of the 5 models I just showed you. Probability-wise, this is the chance over the next 10 days of grabbing an inch. And most of the Ag South and Ag Carolina farm credit space here is looking at better than an 80% chance of getting another inch of rain out of the next few systems rolling through in the next 10 days. Take a look at the Midwest, though. Major planting delays are going to continue toward the end of May, and that's got a lot of folks concerned in that area. From here, let's go ahead and have a look at the models. I have the GFS on the left and the European on the right. We've already watched through this weekend, so there's Saturday into Sunday. Now, we're going to get a little bit of a break early next week, Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday. But our next system by Wednesday is moving through the Midwest, and it looks as though it's going to drop a front over us by late next week. And watch what's going to happen. This again would be next Thursday into Friday when we get that chance for rain. And then the system comes through here by the time I get into Saturday. Now I know you're going, wait a minute, the GFS doesn't show it. Right now the skill scores are higher for the European model, and the GFS is just a bit off on its timing with that next system. So while you do have, after you get through this weekend, here it is, Saturday into Sunday, watch, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's next Thursday that the front begins to approach right here. That's Wednesday afternoon and evening. Thursday it's coming in. that we have our next chance of rain. But overall, the atmosphere is juiced, which is why we see the probability staying relatively high for heavy rainfall. Where we are in the forecast is at around the May 25th time frame. And just want to let you know that the 24th through the 25th, we're looking at a large area that the Climate Prediction Center is seeking out for the risk of heavy precipitation. And that includes parts of Georgia, North and South Carolina. On the week 2 forecast, let's get to that. This is what the models are suggesting. Both the European and the GFS have above average precipitation, but we are now in that time of year where the GFS is almost always biased too dry along the Gulf Coast. It's got a weird bias in it that the European doesn't and the CPC doesn't. So you can see that the 24th through the 30th, we have better chances of staying on the wetter side of average, except for the GFS, which has a known bias. Temperature-wise, as we start to stretch this out, I'm concerned that this pattern is going to flip by the time we get into maybe mid-June. We've had most of our heat and warmth in the east. We've been cooler throughout the west. My concern about this flipping, I'll detail for you in just a few moments. But in the near term, no frost risk to talk about for us, of course. And as we look at what the temperatures are going to do, here's what our highs look like. Friday into Saturday, again, we got cloud cover. We have storms. We've got cooler weather than it could be if those clouds were out. And Sunday, as this exits, that's where we get temperatures here, maybe getting into the low 70s in Virginia and North Carolina. Heat is in Texas Monday, Tuesday of next week. Warmth starts to spread to us by Wednesday. We're back up in the 80s again. And Thursday. It'll be Thursday that our chances for rain start to increase again. But take a look at the northwest where the trough of low pressure digs in, cooling things back off, setting us up for that active week 2 pattern. When we look at total GDDs over the next week, we're going to have accumulate about 125 of them in central North Carolina, all the way down to southern Georgia, up to 181 GDDs grabbed over the next 7 days, because most of our heat lines the Gulf Coast in this particular pattern. Day 5 through 10, some cooler air coming into the northern plains. Day 10 through 15, some of the models are trying to sink that into the midsection of the United States. And what's interesting about that is that the European outlook does the same thing. That's day 5 through 10, which gets us out to the 27th, and day 10 through 15. See that cooler air snaking in through there? Now, I've got big questions as to whether or not this can happen, because the models have tried to do this 2 or 3 times, and it didn't happen. But if we get that going, that means there's a trough here, ridge there, and trough in this area. And that ridge building in some heat into the Intermountain West is one of the things I'm watching most carefully going forward. And one of the big reasons for that is the new June outlook just released by the Climate Prediction Center. And there it is. Now, you remember about 10 minutes ago we were talking about drought in Mexico and drought in Western Canada? Some of the longer range models are trying to bridge that gap. And if you keep things wet in through here and near normal in the southeast, with warmth coming up in this area, that tells me that we're looking probably at a ridge with a broader trough feature here, giving us that flow that comes across, increasing the chances for rainfall. The CPC did the best lately on picking up on the precipitation patterns, better than the European model. But I'll show you the European model for that time frame as well. This is June. And right now, we do not see any indication of drought developing in the southeast. Ag Carolina, Ag South, Farm Credit, looks like you're in good shape going into the month of June at avoiding some early season ridging, which results in drought developing. My concern is that it's going to be back into the west. And I'm going to build that case for you as I start to finish up your video. Here's what the new CPC outlook looks like for summer. June, July, August. They've been this way for the last 3 months, forecasting June, July, August wetter for you. They got the risk of drought in the west. It's where they have the greatest heat risk. But take a look at where it's also warm in the northeast. Now, we do expect a hot and stormy summer for the southeast. But what I don't see right now is major blocking episodes hitting your area. If that changes, you better believe I'll be ringing the alarm bell and telling you about it, but I don't see it today. So what do we see out there? Well, this is the new European model for June, July, August. I showed it to you last week, but let's look at it again. It did go a little drier in through here, but this isn't concerning to me. What I see as being the greater risk is here. That's consistent also with the National Multi-Model Ensemble. See what that dry risk is? With wetter conditions here. Here's a new model to look at. New update to look at. This is the IRI multi-model probability forecast. They take the NMME and statistically correct it for biases. Does not show drought in your area June, July, August, does it? Don't see the risk. So it got it here. It's got an active hurricane season starting at the end of this. It's got a very dry season for Brazil getting into Argentina. It's got a lot of storms coming off the Sahel. See that in August? Delivering the kind of the seeds in those African easterly waves to get an active hurricane season going. It continues to show drought concerns for parts of the Russian wheat belt. It gets the Indian monsoon going early. Much of China's wetter. It's got Indonesia very wet and also Australia. It's a very unique outlook for this upcoming summer pattern. And I want to add a fifth forecast into this, which is something I've never shown you before. It's the JMA. The JMA is a Japanese seasonal forecast model. And we're looking at 6 different panels here, but I want you to focus in first on this one. These colors represent wetter than average. These would be drier. And just take note, we don't see strongly anomalously dry conditions setting up here. Nor do I see big ridging. See that? Looking out here at the mid-level atmosphere pressure patterns, I even don't see major episodes of high pressure setting up in there. What I do see is that the MJO may favor living over near Africa, which is phase 1. That opens up and takes the lid off of the active hurricane season that could start here. And the other thing it does is, historically, that gives us a pressure pattern like this for summer, with some sense of ridging pushing up here toward the west coast and another ridge of high pressure there. And did you notice in the CPC forecast it kept hottest conditions here and there? This would suggest that the flow would come over the top and dive into this area, giving us northwest flow and storms. And that is something that the atmosphere has preferred to do more often than not over the last 33 years. You see, this is a July composite map from 1990 to 2023. And it's one of the flow to more often than not come screaming through here over this ridge, come racing up like that, and then diving into this part of the country, meaning the heat and drought risk goes in this direction. No big southeast ridge showing up in this pattern. What does this give you? This ends up giving you dryness that stretches here with storms cascading over the top coming down like that. There's only one concern with this pattern that I have to address. If we have strong northwest flow all summer long, you will get a rain shadow effect coming off the Blue Ridge Mountains or the Appalachian Mountains here. And that's why we see some dryness into the interior of the Carolinas. That could be cured by a very active hurricane season. But if I'm talking all summer long about northwest flow, that is another way, other than a big southeast ridge, that you can get into some dry conditions in the interior parts of North Carolina and Georgia, and South Carolina, So let's keep that in mind, but I'm not overly concerned about it just yet. So what do we do at the end of this? Well, let's take another global look, but dial this back to the last 20 days. Very cold in the Russian wheat belt, including a big frost here. We've been cold in Argentina as well. Hot on the Safrina Acres. There's the temperature pattern across North America. If we look over the next 10 days at precipitation, the European model went drier for the Russian wheat belt. It brought more rain into the flooded acres down here in Rio Grande do Sul, and it's kept much of Indonesia wet, Southeast Asia wet. And this is going to be a pattern we're going to watch globally evolve in the coming weeks and months to understand what this summer and what this fall could look like. I'm still quite concerned about the hurricane season, and I'm also wanting to just figure out where is the ridge going to set up this summer. Today I'm leaning toward it being in the western U.S., and that's the case I wanted to present to you. So I'm going to stop there, tell you all to have a good weekend, and we'll pick this up next week. Thanks.